How's it going, Eve?
You know, Day in the life of an entrepreneur.
All right, so we'll just give a few minutes for people to join.
That is the important part.
Brian, Texas.
Texas is in the house. Look at that. All right, a couple more minutes here. We'll let everybody get all chimed in. We will go from there. I'm so excited. How many people are excited to talk about disease prevention?
Oh, I
Right?
am.
All the things, all the things. These are the things we live for. All the important things in life. That's what we go with. All right. Love the fact that we have people from all over. My dog can hear me right now, so she's yipping at me from the lower level. She's like, I hear you. You're home. Let me come and bother you. That's what they like to do. All right. Fabulous. Well, I think without further ado, we can get the show on the road. All the fun things. So, if you have not joined us before, you are on a Dog Handler Academy webinar. And today we are going to be talking with Aerapy about disease prevention basics for handlers. Anybody that has ever worked in some sort of a office environment, school environment, or you know what, you probably went to school at some point in time. And you know that when one person gets ill, everybody seems to catch the virus at some point, right? If COVID has taught us nothing other than the fact of what comes out of our mouth does travel for a period of time and space, and that there are those buffers that you need to have. And how do you make sure that what comes out of one dog's mouth or one human's mouth doesn't infiltrate the entire facility? So that is kind of the preface of the conversation for today. Many more details I just kind of skimmed over, but that is my part of it, anyways, or at least my understanding of it. And so, without further ado, we will hand the microphone over to Aerapy to really teach us everything that we need to know about prevention and being proactive. And when we're talking about airborne type of diseases and the basics that we need to know.
Okay, well, Eve, thank you so much. I really appreciate you letting me come on today and being able to talk about my passion. So just to get everybody started with this, if anybody who's not met me, my name is Annette Uda and my company is Aerapy. We started our business back in 2008, and it was not because of me, but actually, believe it or not, my dog Tasha started this business. So Tasha was a Shih Tzu that I had for many, many years, and she was with me in my home. I had a home-based business at that time. I was a travel agent, and it was wonderful. I enjoyed it. Allowed me to be able to be home with my kids as they were growing up. And Tasha was my little Shih Tzu that would sit by me the whole time. What ended up happening is that we found over time that she started developing environmental allergies, and so because of her is the whole reason why Aerapy exists. Now, as some of you may have seen those billboards of somebody who looks like really young and then they look old. Well, here you go. My I started my business in 2018, so fast forward, here I am today. But again, I did start my business in 2018. And the reason I did that is because we did find out that because of environmental allergies is can really cause issues with pedotopy or for animals that become sick because of indoor quality. And ironically enough, when the doctor told me that she had pedotopy, or environmental allergies, I didn't believe it because of the fact that my house was always clean and I didn't understand what in the world could be making her sick. But the more that I started researching and finding out, then the more aware I was about what indoor air quality really looks like. And so basically, just I've been working, like I said, since 2018, trying to validate studies. I'm trying to make sure that I understand the focus and understanding of how disease transfers and transmits, and also trying to figure out how do we control this. So I'm going to get right into it. And again, if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask me questions. I'm going to minimize this screen so I can see. So basically, I want to talk about a few different things. So we're talking about aerosolization that can be anywhere from canine cough, viruses that are going to be like for canine influenza, distemper, all the way to allergies, URIs, anything that we're talking about that can aerosolize. So as we know, canine cough, it's very contagious. It can spread through the air. And we also know that respiratory infections, whether it's going to be, like I said, canine influenza, distemper, it doesn't matter what it is. We're talking about upper respiratory infections. And the primary transmission route of any respiratory infection does spread through the air. And so it's important to understand that, because a lot of times people think I've done everything I could possibly do. Why in the world are we still having issues? But again, the reality is that whenever you're going to have a large group of animals together or a large class of people together, you're going to end up finding, as it was brought up earlier by Eve, when you're talking about SARS-CoV-2, these viruses can replicate and they can end up going crazy and just trying to find a host, and that host would be you and I, because they are rapid transmission. So I'm going to go through a few different transmission routes, because I think this is really important for everybody to understand. So airborne transmission is spread through the infectious droplets or aerosols. And so what I want to explain is the difference between droplets and aerosols. If you take nothing away from this today, remember that droplets are larger particles that expel and fall to the ground. They only travel very short distances. But when you're talking about aerosolized, or if you want to look up the word droplet nuclei, those are particles that will stay aerosolized and can stay remaining airborne upward from hours to days, and in some cases it could be weeks. So the problem is that it never settles out of the air. And remember, the one thing about viruses, they have one job, and that's to survive. And so for them, that's why you might hear about SARS-CoV-2, or you might hear about the different variants that are coming through, even with the seasonal flus, because it's trying to mutate to be able to stay active and alive. So you're always going to be seeing that you're going to have new aerosolized viruses or bacteria that's spreading throughout the building. And also we do know about contaminated surface. We know that it's important for us to be able to, clean the surfaces, make sure that everything is going to be nice and clean. I'm sure you do this all day long, every day, all day. It's hard not to, right? And then direct contact. It's going to be the physical touch between the infected animal and person. And also it's going to be talking about handling the infected animals. Now, the one thing that a lot of people are not familiar with is fomite transmission. It just basically means that it's contaminated surfaces. That would be something like your bowls, leashes, the toys, things like that. Anything that can carry the pathogen from one animal to another.
That's a key point too. And I always stress this with my staff, is that I feel like we are one of the biggest contaminants, because we go and we touch dog A, and then we touch dog B, and then we touch dog C, or we go into this play group, or we go back into boarding. And if you think about it, like when the dogs are, if you're in the play group with the dogs, right? What do? They bring their nose up to your legs and your feet. They might lick your hand. Their noses are on your hand. So like you're getting it all on you. And then you go over to the next group, or you go back into boarding and you let a dog out. What's the first thing he does? He comes over and he sniffs your feet, or he wants to walk up to your hand to get petted. So that's one thing I really stress to all my staff, is like, we are the contaminants that spread it just as much as the dogs do to each other.
Yeah, that's very true, because like I said, these pathogens are just there to survive, right? So however they have to take a ride to get to the next host, they will do it. What I do want to mention too is understand about airborne risk and aerosols. This is the one hidden secret that a lot of people don't think about. If you remember when SARS-CoV-2 came out, they were talking about in the very beginning where you want to wipe everything down. You want to clean your grocery bags. You want to take off your shoes. They want everything to be wiped down because they thought that was a primary transmission route. And then fast forward, they said, wait a minute, this thing is aerosolized. And if you think about aerosolized, as I mentioned before, the reason that aerosolized is so critical is because these are suspended aerosolized particles that can actually travel, and they are so tiny. And give you an idea, so there, and I don't want to get too geeky, but if you talk about a SARS-CoV-2 virus, you're talking about zero point 0.1 microns in size. You're talking about canine influenza, canine cough. That is the exact same size as zero point 0.1 microns. So that means that it can stay suspended in the air for weeks. And so because of that, you have to remember that all it's going to do then is waiting for that susceptible host. Once it enters the dog's nose, it's going to bypass the hairs, it's going to bypass the filter, it goes directly into the lungs. When it goes directly into the lungs, now you're talking about the influenzas, you're talking about the dogs becoming very sick. And that's the biggest challenge we have. And that's what shuts down a lot of facilities. Because when these animals become that sick, it's because it's gone into their lungs. So now when you're talking about surface transmission or fomite transmission, yes, they will get sick. But there's a difference between getting a cold and getting the flu. And so this is what we're focusing on today, as far as really opening that door to show what's happening with these aerosols and what's infecting these animals and why is it causing such a havoc, right? So again, they travel distances, and I use this smoke illustration because they're aerosols, they're tiny, they're up in the air. I flew in from Chicago to Minneapolis today, and I'm looking out and I'm looking at all these clouds, and I'm like, how in the world are they staying suspended when they look like they're big and heavy, right? But they do. I mean, because they're full of moisture, and it's what they do. So, but the concentration buildup is crazy because it's built up over time in enclosed spaces. So this is a really good analogy. I use this all the time. So I know none of you have done this, but I have. If you have ever burnt anything from your oven, you see how quickly that room is going to fill with smoke, right? So imagine if you have dogs together in one area, in one room. When the more dogs you have together, if they are barking, sneezing, panting, shaking, they are releasing over 100,000 particles with just one cough. If you're talking about sneezes, that's even more. So very soon and very quickly, you've got over hundreds of millions of particles within a day that you've got with these animals. There is no way that you're able to get everything out immediately, because what happens is that when we find that we burn something in the oven or that smoke is there, kind of think of those as being your pathogens or viruses. We run to the desk or run to the stove and we're turning the vent on, we're opening windows, opening doors, trying to push all that out because we don't want to inhale any of that. And so the problem with viruses and bacteria and even mold spores is that we don't see them. So sometimes we sit back and be complacent thinking, well, if we don't see it, it doesn't exist. But as we have learned very unfortunately, the hard way, is that these pathogens do infect and they can be very deadly.
I was going to say, clearly we are not Facebook friends, or you would know I burn stuff all the time.
I was trying to be kind, but I unfortunately, I don't know. I'm a famous person for burning toast.
Yeah, it's an ongoing joke that I'll take a picture and I'll say I didn't cook. It was edible. That is all. And then other times I'm like, I tried to cook. It got burnt. I ordered pizza.
Hey, Eve, I would love your picture.
A lot of them. There's a lot of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
When
you
I
got
did have a question. So when you talk about like, every time you say aerosol, I just think of, I'm going to age myself here, but Aquanet hairspray, but like hairspray, right? Like
right, right.
super fine misting versus the droplets that you're talking about. I think of that as more the non-aerosol sprays that you have, more like a Febreze, I guess, or something like that, where it's not as fine of a particle. Am I
Right.
understanding that difference?
Uh, Pretty close. So if you think about it,
Okay.
I use the dancing dust that you look through when you see a window and it's sunny day and you see the dust
Yes,
that
yes.
that's okay. So you can see those dust particles. So what's happened is that these viruses will actually take a free ride on all of these dust particles within the room. They are so microscopic that you cannot see them even under a magnifying glass. I mean, even the picture I'm showing right now, that is like super, super amplified. There's no way for the human eye to ever see that. So imagine how many viruses can travel on one tiny dust particles. So yes, so aerosolized means that it's going to stay in the air. And think about like, well, let's go back to the stove analogy, right? So even if you're going to be burning, let's say brownies, or even if you're cooking brownies, if you're up in your room and you're down and somebody else is down in the kitchen, you're going to smell that throughout the whole house because that odor transfers, right? So think about the same thing with these pathogens. They're doing the same thing. We just can't see or smell them. Does that answer your question? Does it help?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like I said, I was like in my head, I'm just like trying to like give myself a good visual understanding of it. So, nope, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Right. So if you can think about how many particles there are, it's impossible for an animal's body or a human to be able to fight that off because if and again, I'm gonna get geeky again, but when you start having these viruses getting into the deepest part of the lungs, which is the alveoli, that's when everything starts to be really harmful and it can lead to death. Now, you take an immune compromised animal or a baby or something like that, it could be deadly. When you're talking about like even healthier animals, it could take weeks for them to before they can even recover. And that wreaks havoc on your business, right? Because if they're out, then it's just a multiplying domino effect. But the good news is that we talk about stopping the aerosolized threat, we can absolutely do that. And so when we talked about the studies that I've done, which is coming up, but also the time that I took to invest in this. So when I did start this business, I did close my other business, my travel agency, because I was so fascinated and I was just so shocked about how indoor air quality can really affect us. And unfortunately, I'm kind of like spoiling the end of it here, but if any of you have heard my story about Tasha, she was my world. And I think of all of us have our babies are the same way, right? But for her, her environmental allergies got so bad that she was getting steroid shots nonstop, like every 3 months. And it got so frustrating that I asked the doctor, what can I do? I don't know what else to do. And she said, well, if you can find the source of the problem, you can stop the problem. So that day I took that as a challenge. And so that's when I started doing all my research and started going to the universities, started going to do my studies, went to hospitals, went to, you name it. I mean, I was the why girl. I needed to understand what was happening because I couldn't do anything to make her better. But here's what we're going to go into. We're going to talk about the common air cleaning methods. So I'm sure all of us have heard about different things, right? So we've got the ventilation for our buildings. If you've built your building, you heard about ERV systems, energy recovery ventilators, outside air. Well, those are wonderful. It's important to make sure that you've got the air from outside coming in. You want to be able to help dilute that air, remove some of the indoor pollutants, also odors. So it's wonderful to do that. We have filtration, which we have HEPA filters. You've heard of that, or MERV filters. So that's another common one we have. We have ionization. Some of you may have heard of ionization. And then also, I can read all of these, but you could read too. So we've got aerosols, you've got also your portable and all the UVC light. What I want to do is to really deep dive, I can't talk, it's a long day. I want to dive deep into what do all of these do and how can they help us. So ventilation, as I mentioned earlier, they bring in fresh air. And so what they're going to be doing is diluting a lot of the air, and it's going to only be effective if you can get the amount of dilution or the air moving and exchanging to be able to remove those pathogens. Now go back to what I was saying earlier about the smoke in the room. You have to open those windows, turn on the vent. If you do that, it's going to still take time to get out. So if you have all those pathogens in that room, you're not going to get them out fast enough. They're going to infect and they're going to travel and they're going to spread throughout your building. So I just want to make sure that if you're talking about higher risk areas, now if you're talking about a bathroom, a laundry room, that gives plenty of time for that air to do that 6 air exchanges per hour to maybe get all that stuff out. But when you have a large amount of animals in one space, you just do not have the time to get that out. So again, it is really good about reducing the overall concentration of contaminants, but it doesn't have the same time that we need to have it done. So filtration, girl, Eve, I could tell you, I could show you so many pictures. We all are in the animal care industry. We understand how fast hair can end up getting onto a filter. So
Geez,
we
that
all,
looks like my daughter's bathroom fan vent, right? Like, no, I'm kidding. Teenager, right? Like, whoosh. But
right,
no, yeah, it's filtration is huge.
it
Um,
is, yes.
but it doesn't negate cleanliness, right? Like, I mean, everything has to work all together.
Right. Well, and the problem too is that when you're talking about having filters or even well, HEPA filters are wonderful, but they just don't fit in animal care. And even honestly, I never recommend anything more than a MERV 8 filter because it's large enough. The MERV 8 is strong enough to be able, or I should say an allergen filter or MERV 8, because you're going to be able to get some of the larger particles that I talked about that they drop to the ground and move around. That's fantastic. But the problem is that if you have anything higher than that, you're going to have a lot of clogging going on and you're going to be changing filters constantly. So you really want to stay with Mervate unless, and that's again my opinion, but we would talk to a lot of specialists and architects and mechanical engineers that really don't recommend anything over a Mervate.
No, and that's true. I actually had a situation this past winter. I bought one of those fancy like $35 filters for my house. And 2 weeks into having that filter in my house, and it was making my furnace glitch because it wasn't allowing enough airflow through.
Right, and that's exactly what happens. So, and I love what you just said because I usually bring, when I do my in-person meetings, I'll bring a straw and I will blow through the end of it, and you can blow with no problem, right? But if I put my hand at the end of that straw, I can't get the air out. And that's exactly what happens to our filters. If they're plugged, they can't move the air. But you have to remember, they capture particles, they do not inactivate them. So when the filter is full, even the best filter trying to capture the large particles, the pathogens will go around them. And now you're just re-aerosolizing the larger particles back into the room as well. So it is important to make sure that we are changing our filters pretty regularly. But again, for cost reasons, if nothing else, I would not go any higher than a MERV 8. And we always talk about like, so why ventilation alone falls short? Because the problem is that you're continuously having an introduction of pathogens. You're not going to get rid of them. As long as the animals or humans are in a room, you're going to be expelling pathogens. And think of it this way too. My body temperature is what? 98, and in my room right now I'm looking at it 66 degrees. So even in the wintertime, any of us that go outside, you'll see that as we're talking, our air is going to come out. You're going to see that white plume come out and or smoke come out. Not smoke, but the exhaling of that, and it's like the heat rises. So as everything is being expelled, it's going up and then it's circulating, right? And so the problem is the same thing with the smoke illustration. You're having continuous introduction of pathogens. You just cannot stop if you have a sick animal within the area. And the interesting thing enough too, I found is that even if an animal is sick, they have more excretions that end up coming out than they do if they're healthy. So when you're talking about respiratory infections being transmitted through the air, double the amount of how many particles are being expelled because of their respiratory tract and they're sick. And so again, we're talking about the ventilation. They have slight slow dilution rate, and they're insufficient for immediate reduction. And we talked about ionizers earlier, and I really want to make sure that I want you to understand that I don't think there's any bad technology out there. My question will always be, what is the purpose of it and how does it work and how can it help me keep my doors open? So an ionizer, just so you're aware of, there are a lot of air purifiers out there, or even they have ionizers that go into the ventilation system that might claim they have a UV light. You have to remember that that UV light is only used as a catalyst, and it's a very low UV watt light, because what's happening is that they're trying to get the ions to be able to work up enough to be able to be expelled into the room. So an ionizer is basically going to be having charged particles that go into the room. And what they're doing is they're going into the room and they're trying to capture these dust particles that we spoke about earlier, and it's going to drop them to the grounds, the cages, the dogs, the leashes, the bowls, everywhere. It just drops some living pathogens out of the air onto the ground. The problem and the challenge is that they don't die immediately. You can be looking at days to weeks. Let's just be kind and say it's going to be an hour to 3 hours in the best case scenario, but they can also go days and longer before they can inactivate them.
And
So
that's based on like temperature, moisture,
it
all the
could be
different
actually
factors.
because of air movement. So what
Hmm,
happens is that when you go
gotcha.
to, so if they're dropping those particles out of the air, if you go to clean or you're walking by, those particles are re-aerosolizing. And the challenge is all of the studies we've seen has always been in a very tiny confined space for ions. And the problem is that you need to be able to build those ions up. So if you open a door or if you're doing anything like that, you're releasing those ions, and it's impossible. Well, I shouldn't say it's possible. It's just, it takes a long time to build those ions up to where you have enough of them that's going to do anything to be able to capture enough particles to drop to the ground. And the problem is that ionizers cannot go far enough out. Now, I say that not because I'm beating up on ionizers, but it's because when I first started in my career, I did use an ionizer. And the more I learned about it, it's like, well, this is kind of counterintuitive. So we basically stopped using the ion because it really, in my opinion, it didn't do what I was hoping it would do. And I'm going to tell everybody in the audience out there, do your homework. Look at the studies, look at the research. I mean, you really need to be able to know what is it that you're getting, right? And I'm always here, and I have Heather, who's in my office, is wonderful. We're happy to do even comparisons, not because of anything other than we want you to be educated, because this is your business. These animals are coming to you for comfort and health, and we want to make sure that you're being protected.
And we
So,
love Miss Heather.
oh yes, I do too. So we're going to talk about aerosolized disinfection. Now, I have to laugh because we've heard about different like hydrogen peroxide examples, for aerosolized. But I was watching TV yesterday, and they had this uh, commercial on showing how they were spraying the air from all the bacteria, and it was wonderful. And they were trying to inactivate the pathogens. But then I shook my head thinking, okay, you did that, but the problem is that the minute that you end up releasing that trigger and putting it down, and you introduce more pathogens, you're going to be having the air still infected, right? So it's not going to keep up with what really needs to be done. So there are very much limitations to the usage. But again, where are you using it in? Are you using it in the bathroom? That's fine. I mean, but what I'm saying is that if you're trying to be able to control aerosolized pathogens, you need to match danger to danger, right? So you need to make sure that you're getting those pathogens to be able to get infected or get immediately inactivated. You don't have time to wait.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. And that's a huge thing, right? It's like, okay, everybody hold still for 5 minutes, right? Like I need to do this disinfecting. Like, yeah, like you're right. It needs to be effective relatively immediately.
right. And the problem is that, like I said, you've got to make sure you have to understand these pathogens are not going to stop coming. As long as you've got the animals in, they are continually, just by panting, if nothing else, will still have these pathogens being released. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, even as you were talking about, like, if you get them to drop out of the air, I mean, there's still movement. Yeah, the dogs are moving, we're moving, air is moving, your HVAC system is moving. So it's
yeah,
always some sort of a motion type thing when they're still alive.
and you definitely don't want them licking or putting that into their mouth, especially,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah. So again, as I mentioned with the doctor, I'm going to go back to my story when the doctor told me if I found the solution that I can end up or finding the problem to the problem that she was having. So what I did is I did reach out to it was Penn State. I also reached out to Mayo Clinic. I reached out to a couple of different hospitals asking them, what are you doing to clean your air? And so they said the only thing they use, like in operating rooms, they use UVC. And that makes sense because if you think about it, if you have somebody in ISO, all right, and you're in a hospital, they cannot be breathing the same contaminated air that they're exhaling because otherwise they're not going to get healthier and they're not going to recover quick enough. So what they're doing is they're constantly purging that air, but they're also introducing UV. Because the difference is that with UV disinfection, it is going to be an effective pathogen inactivation on contact. So it does not rely on particle settling or dilution. I mean, basically, once it makes contact, it is going to be inactivating it. I'm going to go a little bit quicker here because I really want to show you some slides that I think are pretty cool and it's going to bring the whole thing together. But your portable air purifiers, love them. I am not putting them down. As I said, none of this stuff is bad. But again, you want to remember that they're pretty much better for small, less traffic areas. Because if you look at we used to sell an air purifier, but it was intended for a small area. Look at the instructions, look at what they say, because a lot of times it'll say this is how many square feet it's going to be good for. You may end up with 10 air purifiers and maybe 1,000 square feet, and that's going to be very cost productive inhabited. And then you're going to have to change filters all the time. So you have to remember where are you putting them and what is the application. So when you're talking about higher areas, then you want to be really cautious about what you're doing, but at least be educated. That's all I'm saying is just look at the instructions, see what you want to do. For me, we've stopped selling the ionizers and we stopped selling the air purifiers because it just could not keep up.
No, and you bring up a really good point. A lot of times, too, when you're buying these products off Amazon or your hardware stores, they're not meant for a commercial setting. And that's a key thing. Um, that, they're meant to run on and off, for a few weeks, but they're not meant to be running all the time, 24/7, 365. They're not commercial grade entities. And that's something to really think about. You don't want the fans and the motors in them to like burn up and start a fire. So you just have to be really cautious when you're buying some things that are just not intended for such an industrial use and or to be around dog hair.
Right. Well, that's a good point, but also thinking too, like commercial, you're right, but also medical use. So you really want to be able to see what is the intended use of it and what's it going to do. Because I just really want you all to remember the smoke illustration, because if you see all that smoke and the plume in there, you have to take immediate action. And unfortunately, a lot of this technology just can't do it. Not that I'm saying any of it's bad. It's just, again, what's the intended use for it? So I want to really get into this because as I talked about earlier with my doctor saying if you can solve the problem or you can find the problem, you can solve the problem. Well, she wasn't wrong. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit and tell you what ended up happening with Tasha while I'm doing this. We ended up, after going and doing all the studies and the research that we did very, very early on in the career. So there wasn't like us doing studies. It was just researching everything. We put a commercial grade UV light within our home. And on top of that, I put a allergen filter, which was not uncommon because I used them all the time. But literally within, I'm going to say 3 weeks, Tasha's hair started to grow back. And the reason I say that is that if anybody's had an animal or a dog with peditopy, it's awful. I mean, they're rubbing their faces raw, they're biting at their fur, they're eating their paws, they're going crazy because they're just so uncomfortable. And so once we ended up putting this in, I was really amazed at the fact that not only did her allergies subside, but my daughter's asthma cleared up and my seasonal allergies got better. So much so that when I went back to the doctor, she thought that we went to see a different doctor because we didn't bring Tasha back as often as we always did. But the reason that it was so important is I want people to understand the difference because UVC lighting, when it is properly sized and is the correct dosage, if you will, for your facility, it works amazingly and is wonderful. But there's different UV lights. And so if you think about UVA, that's going to be contributing to aging, wrinkles on the skin. That's just what UVA light does. UVB is what it damages the DNA. And if you remember, as you'll see, like in the summer months coming up, they're going to be telling us to make sure we're wearing sunscreen. You want to make sure you're applying it with, so many SPFs. They want to make sure that we're protected so it doesn't cause cancer. Now, UVC is actually the shortest wavelength, and it is the one that is germicidal. That is actually located above the ozone layer, and that is going to actually inactivate and kill viruses and any kind of other microorganisms. Now, when I say just not only viruses, but bacteria and mold, friends, with us in this animal care industry, mold is going to be a problem all the time because we have nothing but humid areas, whether we're bathing or washing or cleaning. We're always going to be introducing mold into the environment, right? Or the pathogens. Because what happens is that mold's aerosolized as well. And all it needs is a dark, damp place to grow and it's thriving. And so the nice thing about this is that there's not one thing that we have ever found with that UVC light cannot kill, or I should say inactivate, because it breaks the DNA. So whether it's DNA, RNA, single, double strand, enveloped or non-enveloped, it doesn't matter. Once that light actually touches and penetrates through that pathogen, it breaks that code and is no longer harmful and it cannot infect any other animals. So that's why it's really important to understand what does UV light actually do. It's actually, it doesn't wait for anything. It kills on contact. And it's always at the 254 nanometer. They do have other things that are like 222 nanometer. And at this point, I'm being very cautious when I say this, they are finding that there's something called far UV that they say can stay in a room for occupied spaces. It is very new technology. And at this point, I have not seen anything where it shows that it can be used past 8 hours. That being said, I've also seen some other studies that I'm very leery on. So I would just say at this point, I'd be very cautious as to what type of UV that you're using. But at this point, the UVC at the 254 nanometer has always been true and tested. It's been over 100 years that it's been used even in medical facilities. So again, for me, I'm the why girl, and I wanted to see how do I know this is going to work. So we literally went into an ISO unit this was an animal shelter, and they wanted us to put a petri dish. Well, they did it. They put the petri dish by the return or by the supply vent of their building or their HVAC system, and they did the before. They put it in there, locked it up, put it away. That once we installed our UV system, they waited 2 days. They did the exact same HVAC system, the exact same location, and they put the petri dish right where they did before with the return air, the supply air, sorry. But they put it there, and you can see that it had pretty much eliminated all but one microscopic particle that was in there. So that is, to me, crazy being able to see that being changed. So again, I wanted to make sure that anything that I said that I was saying this correctly. And so we actually went out and did third-party testing. And if anybody knows anything about studies, all you're able to do is to size a room, size a part or pathogen that you're wanting to inactivate with the proper dosage, and you walk away and just hope that everything turns out well. Well, we ended up finding even during SARS-CoV-2, a lot of people were concerned about whether or not the units can kill the pathogens. And if anybody who's followed us knows that during SARS-CoV-2 situation, we had the FDA contacting us saying that they were going to give us emergency use authorization because we had so many studies showing that we could inactivate the pathogens immediately or on contact. So when I talk about a single air pass, I'm talking within the air handler. So that petri dish shell that I showed you earlier that was going through the air circulating, that's what was happening. And so that's where they went into the lab and found that we could actually inactivate it in one air pass at a 99.97%. And then also we did it on surfaces because we wanted to make sure that we were able to protect surface pathogens as well. And then if you're looking at the MRSA, we've got the MS2, Bordetella, canine distemper, feline herpes virus. It really doesn't even matter what we have here because it's going to inactivate immediately. So that's why I just really wanted to show these studies that it's immediate. It doesn't take time.
I
So the
think that's
important,
like super important that you're really stressing that like it's immediate because that's the key piece. I mean, whether it's looking at it from how many potential dogs within your facility are, could potentially become ill with canine cough, or just the fact of having it last longer than it needs to within your facility. I think looking at both of those ideologies, that's where killing it immediately is just so important.
right. And if you think about like the viral loads, so again, going back to the smoke illustration, if you think about how many pathogens are in that room, if we have that UV system going continuously, that viral load will always remain under control to where it's going to mitigate a lot of disease transmission. And so for us, I'm proud to say we're in over 1,000 facilities. To my knowledge, we have not had anybody tell us that they've had an outbreak since putting our units in. But again, that's because we work with every single person. This is not a plug for my company. It's just that I want people to understand that when it comes to UV sizing, you have to make sure that you are sizing accurately because it's going to be, I'm like, right, this screen is perfect timing. It's exposure, concentration, and time. So with UV, it has to be the right amount of UV energy to be able to be having exposure to the pathogen to be able to inactivate it immediately. So the longer the pathogen lingers in the air, the higher risk of transmission. So what we want to do is make sure that we are inactivating these pathogens within a space that it needs to be on contact because we don't have time. I say you can't dance with the devil. I mean, at the end of the day, we are really going up against something that could be life or death, or even opening or keeping our doors open or closed, right? So you have to make sure that you've got the proper dosage to make sure that you're keeping all of these things out of your building. So now we've talked about the study data. We've proven effective against 99% of them. Canine influenza, Bordetella, parvovirus. We've done so many different studies with different ones. And again, this was more for us coming to the public saying, look, we've tested against these. We've studied these. These are what is causing a lot of issues, but they can be easily inactivated. This is one that I'm extremely proud of, and I was so happy about this one. This one like brings me to tears. We had a animal shelter reach out to us asking us if we would come in because they were having a high situation with them, the kitten nursery or the kittens that would come in, and they were passing away. And so they asked us to come in and do, again, with you talked about studies, you come in, you size their facility, you walk away and pray everything worked out well. So what they did, now this is a little bit not going into total information of this, but this actually was a 3-year study. The first year they did a baseline. They wanted to make sure they had the exact same, they had the same staffing, the same PPE, the same cleaning materials, they had everything identical. They wanted to see a baseline of how many animals that they had that were sick, the mortality rates, things like that. So then after they had the base year, the next year they had us come in, we sized everything again, and they wanted us to turn our units on for 4 weeks, and they turned them on and off for 4 weeks consecutively to see if there would be any impact. At the end of that first year, they found that the upper respiratory infection reduced by 63.7%. I'm going by memory here. But they were so happy with that they said, okay, we're going to do it in one more year, but we want to leave everything running 24/7 and see where we end up. They ended up finding that there was a reduction of upper respiratory infection by 87.1%. Do you have any idea what that meant? I mean, I get so choked up about that because that means that all these kittens that would have passed away were able to get adopted. And that just means so much to
Right.
me, right? I mean, they're so vulnerable. So we were just really
Oh,
happy with that.
absolutely. Well, and you know, and just the fact of a new kitten coming in who didn't have any, you know, it's keeping that kitten healthy without
Exactly.
even making it go through that piece, right? Like so that that kitten, that next kitten coming in didn't even have to go through the respiratory issues because
Exactly.
everything was being cleaned up. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, because and to your point, I mean, animals coming into a facility, whether they're excited and happy or they're stressed out, when your immune system goes down and your immune system goes down, but then you have all these pathogens coming at you, then it's easy to get sick. So the nice thing is that if we keep everything clean from the air, then let them acclimate to their environment, and we don't have to worry about transmitting anything. So getting back to this, I was really excited because after they did this, they ended up publishing this study within JAVMA, and this one, as well as another one from AJVR, published a journal from the medical journals, it's did the studies that we had for the air disinfection for pathogens as well. So that was pretty exciting. So we do talk about high risk areas in your facility. Now, when I'm talking, what we've got, there's different UV treatments out there, right? You've got UV for water, you've got UV for air, you've got UV for surfaces. And I really want to stress this too. When you're talking about UV for water, I mean, if you can even imagine, I mean, you've got a fish tank. Now, if you think about our drinking water, if you've got UV in a fish tank, you have a certain amount of UV energy that's needed in there, right? Because you want to keep that tank clean, you want to keep it free from any kind of pathogens. So it's properly sized for that particular reason. So then you take the UV for air and then the UV for water. So everything again has to be really tailored to that specific area. So when we're talking about facilities, we always want to look at their intake areas and check in because that's really where all the animals come together at one time, right? So they're going to be in the grooming stations or having fur flying everywhere. You've got multiple animals at one time, the group play areas, the intakes, the training areas, the isolation wards. But so I guess the biggest thing for me is just wanting to understand the high risk environments are really where they're all going to be congregated together. The lower risk are going to be your hallways if you don't have a lot of animals going through at the same time, or your laundry room, or your offices, things like that. So these are little bubbles, but I've tried to make them look like little pathogens so you can see. So what we want to do is we want to show the disconnect between the rapid pathogen spreading and then the traditional detection methods. So the problem is that when these pathogens, as I mentioned, are going out, we've got a gap now because we don't have time to wait for that diluted air or for the filters or the air to exchange because they're happening in real time. And so this is what visually, if you can imagine these pathogens being with these animals, you can see it. But I would take this and I would probably multiply this by 10 if you want to know how many pathogens are being expelled in the air. So I wanted to show one picture here. This is actually going to be showing the rapid coil disinfection. So UV within the air handler to me is really important. I call it the first line of defense. And the reason I say that is because the UV light is going to actually shine on the coils. Who cares? The reason we care is because the coils themselves are what's going to move that air back and forth. If you have the coils full of mold and biofilm and hair, going back to the illustration of blowing through the straw, you can't get that air to move. If you can't get that air to move, you're constantly running trying to get your temperatures dropped and dropped and dropped because you can't seem to get the temperatures cool enough within the building, right? And so that's why it's so important to keep your units or your coils clean. And a lot of times you pay to have the coils clean, but actually UV will do it by default. You don't need to clean the coils. It's just going to automatically do that. And if you have the pathogens or if you have the UV light within the air handler as that air is circulating, it's going to be cleaning the air throughout the air handler anyway. So you've got like a win-win situation when it comes to temperature control, energy efficiency, making sure you're not going to have to worry about your facility, your unit breaking down prematurely, if you will. And so then we talk about the conceptual zone. Do you have, so for UV, they also have upper air UVC. Upper air UVC is literally what it looks like. It's going to be up and away from the animal's plane. But remember the illustration we talked about earlier. As the pathogens are being expelled, they're rising. Heat rises. As it's going up and it's circulating, you're able to get those pathogens killed off because if you look at that, like this unit that you're looking at here, it's got 360 degrees of light going out. So that means whether that dog is at the end of the kennel or if it's all the way at the top of the for beginning of the kennel, that UV energy is actually going out into the room. It is all certified and tested safe for occupied spaces. It's just that it's not safe for the pathogens because as it's going up into that area, it's inactivating them. So this way they can't circulate continually through the room. So now that we've talked about cleaning methods and everything else, I think what's really important to understand, and it was, as you may know, even with IBPSA, if you're looking at what they're coming out with lately, you're talking about evolving regulations and standards. I actually sent out a letter to the New York. There's a big thing going on with New York right now, but they're talking about regulations and increasing everything for animal care facilities that like such as what you own. But what we really need to make sure is that they understand is that we're trying to address all of these things as much as we can because they're really wanting to have higher standards for animal care. The challenge that we're having is because they're wanting to implement some things, but the problem is that what they're implementing is going to be for human health, but it's really hurting our businesses in some respects. So we are trying to speak with them as well. But I just really wanted to talk about the fact that bottom line is standards are coming. And so what's expected in human hospitals and high risk environments is going to be coming down the line eventually to animal care. So it's just important to understand that these are pathogens that they're not going to go away. And I think that, like you said earlier, Eve, I think the SARS-CoV-2 really woke a lot of people up. And I think they're really trying to see what can we do because there's a big bond between humans and animals, right? So if you're talking about zoonotic transmission, meaning that pathogens can transmit from animal to human, that could be a big problem. So
I
again,
think we were even like when COVID first hit and they were telling us like, the dogs could be carrying it and all, all the stuff. And I think yeah, like it was panic, right? Like we cleaned everything, we were disinfecting everything to the point where I was like, okay, I think I smell like Lysol and bleach. I
I know,
can't get
right?
that scent out of my nasal passages. But yeah, I mean that is really the point to it is that the pathogens and the droplets can live outside of the body for a period of time. And that's the part that we don't, I would say, think about on a very high level piece. So
Right. And it makes sense though, right? Because the thing is, like I said, if you can't see it, then you think it doesn't exist. And I can tell you, I'm going to say about 95% of our calls are reactive instead of proactive. And it breaks my heart because at that point, the damage has already been done. It's like I think that the more we start understanding and realizing it's not that people don't want to do what they can do, but we just don't understand it. And I think knowledge is power. The more we know and the more we understand, then we can take action. And so that's why for me, it's just really important for me to get on this mission and to show everybody what, or teach everybody what I've learned. And, on a personal note, Eve, just this is where my passion came in when I did decide to take it as a business. So I talked about Tasha going to the doctor all the time and getting the steroid shots. When I went to the doctor and I told you that the doctor thought we went to see somebody else, it breaks my heart because that same visit is when the doctor told me that she ended up with dilated cardiomyopathy when she had so many steroid shots that eventually it wore on her body. And I lost her because of that. And that, to me, I'm just so frustrated because like I just wish I would have known what I didn't know. You know what I mean? And so I'm on a mission to let everybody, know about this, whether they have an animal with pedotopy or they're running a business. I think that people need to understand, even my mom died from COPD. I mean, indoor air quality matters. And so it's just really important to know that, we have to do something because doing nothing isn't helping. I mean, we talked about SARS-CoV-2, but think about H1N1. Think about
yeah.
all the different pathogens. I mean, these are either going to be enzoonotic or they're going to be zoonotic or they're going to be a pandemic or an epidemic. It doesn't matter because they're not going away. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
we've had
Absolutely. And that's where, so many times now I find myself having conversations with clients where I'm like, have you allergy tested your dogs because they're having all these issues? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, I suggest that you do. And one of the things that always comes up is dust.
right.
And I'm like, okay, so now what are you gonna do? Like you live, and there's dust and grass and just all those allergens type it to it. So that's where looking at the filtration and the UV and all that stuff, cleaning our air allows our bodies to not have to fight so hard. And so then that's gonna just overall increase your health.
Yeah, well, think about it. I mean, would any of us today think about going and getting a bucket of water, going to a pond and picking it up and then putting it in our water bottle and drinking it? Absolutely not.
Yeah, no,
Right? I
no.
mean, we've evolved. And like I said, knowledge is power. So it's like now that we realize that what we put into our bodies can have a detrimental effect, now that we understand what's in the air, it's up to us to be able to take that proactive measure because if we do, it's not only just saving lives and health, but we're also saving our business, right? So To me, it's a no-brainer because of me knowing what I know now. I just wish I would have known it then. But again, we're always moving forward. But again, it's just important that we just really understand how these things are transmitting because I think again, when it comes to, airborne, a lot of people really felt that it was just going to be something that could fall to the ground and that was it. They didn't realize that it aerosolizes. And I think it's really interesting because, we talked about canine cough, and the most frustrating part for us in this industry is they always called it kennel cough. And it's like, really? I mean, they could have picked it up from their veterinarian's office. They could have picked it up from the store when they go to Home Depot. I mean, you never know what
Yep,
these
yep. Actually,
animals.
I gave you a shout out in the chat. I was like, "Do you hear that? It is canine cough, not kennel cough, because they didn't catch it from a kennel; they caught it from a canine."
Exactly. Well, yeah, it's frustrating, but again, knowledge is power. We're educating as much as we can. But so yeah, so basically, the toolkit for air cleaning, you want to, cleaning targeted surfaces, offer dilution. Filter is important to have. Again, I would do not recommend anything more than a MERV 8 unless you are going to really stay very diligent in changing them out constantly because you can break your system if it isn't. And again, UVC, that is the only thing that I have seen that actually will immediately reduce your risk and problems and also kill on inactivate on contact. So, but anyway, I do have time for questions and answers if anybody has any.
There we go. We'll get to those. Let me bring that up. So you said a lot of people when they're calling you, right? It's because they already have a canine cough outbreak or an upper respiratory or oh my gosh, I can't even think of all the different upper respiratory infections. So typically they're calling you after the fact. What are things that you're looking at um, in an existing facility? So, like, do you evaluate like what is their current HVAC system? What is their fresh air? How are they getting dirty air out? Are all of those things coming into play? And then you figure out what, how much UV and how many other added in things that they need? Or is it simply doesn't matter what your current HVAC system is, your system can kind of supersede that?
No, because that's what we talked about earlier. You need contact, intensity, and dwell time. So we don't have customers, we have partners. And that's not just for the
Nice.
one time. We are with you guys from the time the beginning to the end. We've got so many great customers we've had for years. But for what we like to do is we like to size your facilities. So with the modern times that we have today, you can definitely go in and send us pictures of your facilities. I mean, we love it when somebody says they have mechanical drawings and floor plans. If you don't, we just need to get the size of your square footage of and ceiling heights of your facility and then the make and model of your HVAC systems. Because again, we have to make sure that if all those studies that I showed you earlier, Eve, we have
Yep.
to make sure that when that air is, think about it, that air is coming out at 500 miles, it's 500, so it's going out a lot. That airspeed is crazy. So we've got literally 0.25 seconds or less to clean that air as it's passing through the ventilation system. So that's why we have to match every HVAC system with the proper dosage of UV lighting because we want to always achieve a greater than 99.9% kill rate on one air pass. But again, that's going to be for the other areas. I cannot stress this enough. When you're talking about your isolation areas or your boarding areas or your kennels or play areas, you really want to incorporate upper air units with it as well. Think about that being the ventilation and the opening of the windows as quick as you can in a room because your HVAC system just cannot keep up with the pathogens that are being expelled that quickly, if that makes
Nope,
sense.
absolutely. Yeah, yep, nope. There is a question about the UV light helping with contact. If a dog comes in with canine cough or upper respiratory and you get it on your clothes, because of the airflow and the movement and the killing of it, does that help it so then staff are not potentially taking the virus home to their pets?
So I'm so paranoid now because of everything I've seen. I always bring a change of clothes with me whenever I do like any kind of shelters, and I just make sure that they are going to be my shoes and my clothes are going to be changed out before I go home, and then I wash them. But for you going home to your animals, when they're on your clothes, the pathogens can live several hours. So quite frankly, you can bring it in. The difference is again, your animals, if it's going to be surface fomite, toys, things like that, Can they still get sick? Yes, they can. It's going to be like having a cold. It's not going to be the same because those larger particles just can't get down into the alveoli or the deep part of the lungs. It's the aerosolized particles that can. So again, when you're talking about surface or you're talking about fomite or on your clothes, I really highly suggest bringing a change of clothes and just throw them in the washing machine as soon as you get home because there's so many asymptomatic dogs, right? You don't know who's sick and who's
Correct.
not, right?
Yep. No, 100%. And I think you answered this one, but can the UV go into any HVAC that you have? They've had some issues with temperature control.
I would, if they don't mind reaching out to us a little bit, I don't understand you mean, okay, I guess I need to understand temperature control. So if you're talking about the HVAC system, yes, the UV can go into any air handler. We just have to get the make and model of it. If you're having problem with temperature control, I'm thinking two things automatically, that your coils are probably plugged or the filters
Hmm.
are not good, are probably plugged. But the nice thing is that once you put the UV within the air handler, you are immediately going to be, and I think I showed the picture earlier, if I can go backwards, but this was actually a client of ours that didn't believe us. I kept telling them, do not clean your coils. This was 3 weeks later. So this was completely
Wow.
blocked. And they had mold and biofilm buildup. This was the same coil 3 weeks later. So again, that temperature can actually start becoming more regulated and getting back to where it normally should be. When you're putting it at 72, it should be a true 72, or even 68. It shouldn't be going to 80 when you're trying to set it to 70.
Yeah, yep, nope, 100%. And then you were talking about like the grade of the UV. So are these bulbs that need to be replaced on a regular basis, or do they last in perpetuity?
Oh, brilliant question, whoever asked that question. So the systems themselves, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. So our systems are warranted for 5 years. The lamps and the fans are 1 year warranty because the lamps, so if remember we talked about that UVC, that germicidal energy, the
Yep.
lamps themselves have that energy within there, that UVC. So after what happens is that over a year time, you're going to see that energy starting to deplete. So we have to make sure that we're changing them after every 9,000 hours. I don't manufacture the UV lights, but our manufacturer, they state that if you want to have it for air disinfection, you need to change them out after 9,000 hours or 1 year.
Mm,
So that's critical that you make sure that you do change that. Great question.
yep. So add that into your smoke detectors and all all
Yeah.
those yearly things, right?
Well, you know what? Honestly, because we know how people get so busy, we either have maintenance agreements or we just literally will send out an email reminder every year.
Yep. Yep. No, that's always the important part. That's always the important part. So we talked about airflow, um, how these airborne illnesses are transferred and transpired. What are some things that you see coming down the pipeline in the future? We talked a little bit about regulation, but as far as the technology goes, is this something that you think um, is going to eventually just become adopted into all the facilities as we move forward, as more viruses are popping up? We've had some opportunities over the last couple of years with new viruses that we're seeing within the canine world and the feline world. So is this something you think is just going to become so mainstream in the future?
So if I can give you a little bit more background about myself. So since my beginning of starting with knowing about indoor air quality, I don't know if any of you are familiar with ASHRAE. They set the standards it's American standards for heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration. So ASHRAE is the ones that set the standards for the most part. And then you also have your international code book. That's what the buildings are made for when you're talking about your mechanical engineers or your
Yep.
architects. So the problem that well, I shouldn't say the problem, but what has definitely evolved is that, and I'm going to geek out here. I'm probably going to have Heather yelling at me later, but um, so when right now every building is going to be going towards international codes, and international codes have adopted 62.1 ASHRAE code. Within that code, it states that you have your filters that you need to have, but then in 62.1, it also says you need air cleaning technology.
Mm,
So when you're talking about air cleaning, that is now in the mandate and it's in the books. So I don't think it's a matter of if it's coming down the pipeline, it's a matter of when because it's already made it through.
gotcha.
So UV is definitely one that the CDC and ASHRAE and everybody else is really advocating for. And it's funny that you said that because even the CDC says if you're going to use UV, use a manufacturer that can size it accordingly to make sure you're getting it. Because there's factory installs, you've got HVAC technicians, love them to death. They're like my best friends. But they buy over the counter UV and it's a one size fits all. And
Right.
for us to be, I mean, I consider us being in a high risk environment the same as a medical facility. So for
Right.
us, we have to make sure that we're getting the right thing. So to answer your question, simply put, yes, I do see the regulations coming. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And the reality is too, the dog daycare world is not going away, right?
No, no.
Catios are not going away. So the more that we exist and are becoming more and more mainstream, I mean, 20 years ago, the first dog daycares were laughed at. But now, they're everywhere and it's a common practice to take your dog to daycare.
Oh, yeah.
That's that's where things start becoming more standardized.
Well, and I think that you can, it's even you've seen this too. I think a lot of people have opted not to have children, but they have animals and they're setting
100%.
higher standards, right? So I mean, the health and safety has been one of the number one things that people are concerned about when they bring their dogs to daycare.
No, and it truly is. We actually surveyed our clients a few years back, and yep, safety was number one, and the dog's health, was in that top five. So it's definitely an important thing to think about and consider.
Right.
I love how you talked about, when you do have a virus or an upper respiratory, getting out that dirty air is very, 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 very important.
Yeah.
Um, how does humidity affect, well, I know how the humidity allows viruses to live longer, right? Like moist, damp, think of mold. Um,
Uh-huh.
does humidity play a factor in the UV and how it operates because the air is more damp?
No, because what happens is that everything's sized properly, right? So when we
Gotcha.
pretty much tailor it to the high risk environment for animal care, which is a good question too. So within the air handler, you don't have to really worry about the humidity as much because it's always a cooler environment because the air is pushing through, right? Within the
Gotcha.
room, it's important to make sure it's sized properly because we do need to put humidity levels within that equation when we're sizing.
Gotcha. Nope, that totally makes sense. I just think about East Coast, West Coast, North and
Yep.
South,
Yep. Yep.
and the variations that we have.
Right.
To where I'm in Wisconsin, it's either wet from snow, wet from rain, or it's wet from humidity. Take your
Right.
pick.
Well, you're not going to, and like I said, you're not going to get away from it, right? So when you're in the animal care
Right.
industry, you're always introducing water, whether it's doing laundry or it's going to be bathing or it's going to be the water, the cleaning the floors. It's just part of our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Looks like we covered everybody's questions online. If people are watching the replay, how can they get in touch with you? How can they ask you more questions and dig a little deeper?
Sure. Yeah, they can reach out to us by calling our 630 or otherwise they can email us and I think it's Heather's probably online. I think it's going to be
Heather, throw it in the chat for
yeah,
us,
throw it in a
girl.
chat. I think it's either info@aerapy.com or it's going to be hello@aerapy.com. That's aerapy.com.
Perfect. Perfect. There you go. Heather threw it up in that chat for us. No, I greatly appreciate it. I know
Are you there?
addressing it and trying to stop it from truly infiltrate your entire facility, I think is the key piece to that.
Right. Like I said, we just, we've heard so many horror stories and we just don't want any more horror stories. We just want everybody to be happy. It's like, let's
There you go.
take care of
Happy,
business.
healthy, and
Yes.
making a profitable business function appropriately. So, all
Yeah.
the things. All right. Well, everybody from Dog Handler Academy, we thank you for joining us. We are going to hopefully see everybody at the Pet Boarding and Daycare Expo West in Phoenix, Arizona next month. Otherwise, if you have any questions for Dog Handler Academy or you want to reach out to Annette and Heather at the team of Aerapy, certainly you can let us know and we can pass along their contact information as well. With that, everybody, have a safe, happy, and healthy evening.